Kind of awkward. It's great to see everybody. I'm Rob Dunn. I'm the Senior Vice Provost of Interdisciplinary Stuff here at NC State. There's a longer title, but that's the sentiment. And it's my great honor to introduce this event tonight. I'm going to flip through slides a little bit here. And the framing of this event is Charlanta. And this idea of Charlanta emerges from a paper that Adam Charlanta led a number of years ago now. You'll hear from Adam later. And the idea here is that if we just keep doing what we're doing, there's a kind of default city that emerges. And so the yellow space on this map is at the time that the urbanization as it existed. And the red space is the modeled urbanization that would occur were we to keep expanding as we like to expand, building in the ways that we tend to build, just doing what we always do. And for me, this map is a kind of provocation, because it says if we just keep going as we've gone, this is what we'll get. And it may be that what we get is exactly what we want, exactly what we need, that we want Charlanta in this configuration. It's possible. But I think the more likely scenario is that this is what we'll get if we don't spend enough time stepping back to think about what we want. And so collectively, those of us who've been involved in organizing this event and the associated other events, what we're asking is for a collective act of hope, which is to think together about what the scenarios for what we might want can be. Not for one scenario we might build toward, but what's a portfolio of ways of living in cities that we can refer to, that we can think with. And I think it's important to expand this hopeful portfolio because the strength of inertia is great. And I'm reminded of that in part because when Adam wrote this paper, I was then asked, well, why is this where Charlanta is? And the easy answer is, well, that's where the existing cities are, and that's where I-85 is, and so if you keep doing what you're doing, that's what you'll get. And so there's this slime mold-like growth. It grows like an ant colony. That's the simple answer. That's how the model works. But then I got asked by a student, well, but why is I-85 there? And the answer is that, well, that's where the rail line was. And so once you had the rail line, then it was the most sensible place to put the road, and you already had some urbanization along the rail line. And then the anthropologist asked me, well, why was the rail line there? And the answer to that question appears to be that this is the route of the pre-colonial Native America, which is to say that the reason that Charlanta takes this form is that this is the best place to walk north-south if you're on foot and you don't have bridges. And so I thought that was the end of the story, and then an archaeologist asked me, well, why was the footpath there? And this is when you start to hate that you're around so many people with questions. And there's not a great answer, but it looks like a plausible answer is that this was the old game trail for megafauna, so for mammoths and mastodons. And so for Clovis people living here 12,000 years ago, this is where they would go north-south to follow game. And so Charlanta is 12 to 13,000 years of inertia. And so if we're going to act to imagine something different than Charlanta, it has to be a pretty bold kind of hope that we undertake together. And so what I ask you to do is as you listen to talks and you go out and visit with the expositions outside, which are amazing. You know, there are high school students out there thinking in really bold ways. Make sure you see them and their work. But what I ask you to do is to think about what's your portfolio of other cities. You know, do you want a city that's full of transgenic animals producing things we need in new ways? Some people do. Do you want a city that's fully green with native species growing on buildings and on top of buildings, species you might find nowhere else other than that city? Do you want a city of vertical gardens where all your food is where you find it locally? Do you want a city that's connected by sustainable transit systems to other cities, so this very connected, sustainable world? Do you want a city that's mostly walking, where you don't ever travel, but you connect virtually? This is the kind of list that we start to come up with, but what's in your mind? What's the thing that you're more boldly thinking than we can think together? And my experience is the way to get to these bolder ideas is through the collective. It's through all of us working together It's through having the civil engineers together with the artists, together with the writers, together with other people who are just thinking. It's making sure that the high school students whose future this really is are present. And so that's what we hope for tonight, not as a single event, but these events like this is a way of continuing to think. And I was reminded about the great possibility we have for different futures by this image that Jory Weintraub, who organized so much of this with the rest of the team, took. And this is part of I-85 today. And so parts of I-85 are still really green and wild. And so that green wildness offers us a lot of alternative space in thinking. And so I think that's great to think with. And so in that light, I want to now introduce you to the event tonight. So Envisioning Urban Futures Charlanta. The event is jointly sponsored by NC State's Office of University Interdisciplinary Programs. That's the fun stuff I get to do with Jory and others, and Levent and many others here who you'll meet. The Pappas Real Estate Program, that's training our students to think in design and sustainability across the state as we think about development. NC State University's libraries. And then the Longview Project, which is a university level endeavor sponsored by Keats to help us think 10 years, 100 years, and 1,000 years into the future, which turns out on a busy day where there's always a crisis is hard to do. And so the Longview helps us to think and to step back. The event was organized by Adam Walters and Chuck Flink of the Pappas program, Pappas Real Estate Program, by Karen Ciccone and the NC State Libraries, by Jory. And I played some little role in there, mostly being an instigator and disruptor, which is probably less useful than it could be, but thank you for humoring me. NC State Institute for Emerging Issues allowed us this space to use for the event. Rave Catering brought us this future-centric food. Taste it. There's amazing stuff here that is one vision of what we might eat in the future. This is another thing as we think about what we can, how we can live is how we might eat. And so Rave has been really bold in partnering with us. NC State's brewing program is featured over here. So if you had some of the beer, it's made here at NC State. And they've been really innovative. It's thanks to Sebastian Wolfram, but also amazing students. And finally, just plain thanks to Red Nucleus, the band that you heard earlier. For me, music is really central to thinking. Art is really central to thinking. And so it's great to be able to feature art as we think together. And now I have an extraordinary privilege that I get to introduce the mayor-elect, Janet Kowal, who's going to offer some words to help us think about cities in general, but on the dawn of her new role as mayor of Raleigh. Janet has served as, yeah, we can clap. Janet's played many roles in the city and in the state. She's been served in the Raleigh City Council and the North Carolina Senate and as North Carolina State Treasurer. Most recently, she served as CEO and president of the Dix Park Conservancy, where through her leadership, and there's a long list here, but I'll just say through her leadership, she did great things, amazing things with this Central Park-like park in the center of our city. She's a leader in environmental issues and a leader in thinking about how we think about Raleigh in new ways that center the environment. She was just elected mayor of Raleigh last week, and it turns out there's a lot of work you do between being elected and taking office, and so we're delighted that she could take the time to be with us today. She's going to offer a few words about her vision and thinking about Raleigh as a city. I could not be more honored. Mayor-elect.
Good evening. I'm glad to be here, and I really appreciated the optimism of this group because when I was running a few months ago, they're like, well, you know, we're nonpartisan and we're not favoring anybody, but it kind of looks like you might win. So would you want to speak? And I was like, well, I think I'm going to win too. So yeah, I'll come. And I'm grateful for all of you who actually live in Raleigh and voted for me or supported me in some way, or if you have supported Dix Park, my most recent job, and just I love NC State. It is I went to Penn, And I love NC State for the same reasons I love Penn, which is it's very applied, very practical, and particularly when you're running a park, it's like you're a kid in the candy shop with the landscape architects and the horticulturalists and the just all the applied skills. And Mark Hoverston, who's here, sits on the board at Dix. So I've gotten to work with Chuck Flink and others. So just really appreciative of the talent at this school. And I know we've got multiple schools here. So I'm just going to talk about a few things that that I talked about during the campaign and that are exciting in Raleigh. And first off, I mean, this is an amazing city, and we are a growing place with lots of opportunities, and we're just really fortunate to be here. One of the things that makes me optimistic is the Dix Park, and for those of you at NC State, you probably know about that, but it's just an example of a very visionary project that took a lot of different people working over decades, and there's a lot more work to go. But the fact that you can have 300 acres of really incredible landscape, different geographies, overlooking downtown is just an incredible piece of land. The other thing for me that makes Dix Park special is the history of it. Dix Park is an old mental health hospital that at one time had like 2,500 mental health patients and was built in the 1850s. So over a period of, over 150 years was a mental health hospital. But before that, it was a plantation. And then before that, of course, Native American lands. And there was a lot of things that happened on that space. And not only was it a mental health hospital, you have Central Prison right across the street. You had an orphanage at one time, a Catholic orphanage. You had a school for the deaf and blind. So you had this whole district of the city that was for people that were some deemed to be less than, people that needed to be shut away from the rest of society, and in many times were not able to really be their full selves or have the full lives that all of us would have wanted. To take a piece of land with that history and then make it one of the most inclusive places of not only the city, but maybe the state, one of the most empowering, and a place where people can fulfill their potential, creativity. That, to me, is what makes that project so incredible, that you can turn that narrative on its head, and it is a special place. Just a few things that are coming there. We have a major public art program. In fact, today, Lamar Whidbey, who is a local artist who has worked with mental health, he has in fact counseled prisoners on death row in Central Prison around their mental health. He has created a piece that's now on the old forensic psychiatric ward, meaning the ward for the criminally insane, which is left over there at the park. It's got bars on the windows. It is a fairly kind of bleak building, but he has put a piece called Get Well Soon there. So if you are over by the chapel at Dix Park, just directly across, that is the criminally insane building, and that piece is up there, and it'll have explanations. So take a look at that. Another piece of art that we done, if you've gone down Lake Wheeler Road, you may have seen the transmission lines with large sunflower petals. That work I also consider a no small miracle to get Duke Energy, a public utility, to say, we'd like to make a big flower for your transmission line, and to actually have them say, okay, and work with us. There was a whole series of relationships and negotiations there, but to their credit, they said yes. And then we worked with Thomas Sayer, a local artist, who is also incredible, and he worked with them. And so if you drive by there, the opening for that, November 20th, is coming up for a large public celebration of those creative infrastructure. So those are a few ways that I think, there's an example of how the city and different people in the city have really stepped out of the box at Dix Park, and that makes me hopeful. Another set of projects more on the environmental realm. that make me hopeful is, of course, that we've had a long history in this city of investing in greenways. And we have all those greenways, and Chuck Flink, who's here, we all went to Bentonville and was looking at all those greenways. I've been to Atlanta and seen their belt line and the transformation of that old rail line there. And I would love to see us better leverage our greenways, not just for a kid biking to a park and maybe the occasional long distance runner or biker, but really more of that nature way, through the city with much better signage and amenities. And it really heartens me when I see new developments, like some of those that are the Rockway. The Rockway near Dix Park is actually named, not only oriented towards the creek, which is, all those greenways are along creeks, but also named for the Rocky Branch, the Rockway, and see people actually facing them, treating them as amenities, building things like, coffee shops, pubs, bicycle rental, where it suddenly starts becoming an experience that we can leverage in Raleigh. So I'm excited about greenways. Another thing I was saying, other cities that have inspired me, I went to Singapore in August, partially because I was running for this office, and I wanted to see some of the incredible work Singapore had done around Gardens by the Bay. The 5-story rainforest enclosed in a dome seemed a little bit out of reach for our current. We can hope, though. And of course, I do think about the incredible forest we have here, and how could we have people better experience the canopies and the different levels of the canopies here. I also admired, of course, Singapore is a very hot and humid place, as are we. And so I was also admiring, of course, the vertical green in Singapore, thinking that's something we could replicate. All of the different, of course, the large, of course, I watch Crazy Rich Asians on the airplane, but the ones with the big towers with the vines growing up multiple stories into these massive, fantastical trees. I mean, those are all things that in the South, right, kudzu could conquer that. Environmentally, I will also say for those of you, Bloomberg Philanthropies, who cares a lot about cities and a lot about climate change and other issues, has chosen Raleigh to be one of the cities nationally where they are focusing. We have 2 full-time staff sent by Bloomberg to look at how we can, make a difference here in Raleigh. And then actually they're seconding 2 interns from the Harvard Kennedy School in January to work with me just for a couple of weeks. They're also working on Governor Stein's transition. So it's, I think that, that's a fun opportunity to work with students, but of course, I know there's a lot of talent in this room, so hopefully we can work on other projects because again, starting with I value applied learning, how do we do some things different, do pilots in the city. So many good things to come, and I get sworn in on December 2nd, so if you're around, maybe we'll see you at that event, and then look forward to working with both, NC State, all of you here to make Raleigh an even better place than it already is, and look forward to hearing the speaker tonight and your ideas. All right, thanks.
Thank you so much, Mayor-elect. So our first NC State speaker today is Adam Charlanta, who I already mentioned. Adam's a research ecologist with the U.S. Geological Survey at the Southeast Climate Science Adaptation Center, and it's based here at NC State. And so it's a federal unit based in the Department of Applied Ecology. And Adam was the lead author on this paper that predicted Charlanta. And in the time since that paper, which is what, 2014, Adam's really been a national leader in thinking about how we imagine cities, how we think about cities in light of the new challenges we face with climate change and other elements of our future. And so I'll let Adam speak to the rest of this vision, but without further ado, Adam Charlanta.
Yeah, I was gonna
So
say
while
the
we're
same.
getting it up, I will say, serendipity-wise, Rob and I often have some kind of weird mind meld in that I also have a project called the Longview that I'm co-leading with the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, where we're looking 500 years in the future. So, you know, Rob and I, for as long as we've been collaborating, I think we get pretty jazzed about trying to expand how wide we can think about the future and link it to the past, like Rob did in his great introduction there. So thanks all for having me here. Rob also teed me up by saying that the paper we originally wrote was thought-provoking. So I would like to poke and prod and provoke some more thoughts out of us tonight. And I wanted to start with just this, thinking about what is the future of humanity. And I'm really going to talk about this in terms of Charlanta for two big things. First, the future of humanity. This is a simulation of global population for the next 3 centuries. This was done by Resources for the Future for the White House when they were updating the social cost of carbon back in 2021. And what I just want to draw your attention to is that, you know, this population up here in terms of like going up to 25, 30, 35 billion people by the year 2300, that would be a very hot planet. The implications of that are we're digging up all the coal we have and to power the earth. And then down here, if we have this like sort of gradual decrease, thank you, this would be more like a warm planet. Are we going to stabilize the climate? That's sort of the implications of that. But also now look at this. Rob talked before about our paper was sort of a what we call business as usual scenario. If we keep doing what we're doing in the Piedmont area, that's what the model would have shown. This is actually a business as usual scenario for global population, which is really interesting to think about in terms of the business as usual being the trend of declining birth rates that we've seen for the past century and a half or so. So that's really something to think about. What kind of world is this in which 100 years from now, you know, we actually have a declining global population and potentially pretty rapidly? Profound implications for what that means for the globe, for humanity, for the built environment. And now the other big sort of constraint I want to think about in terms of the Earth is the climate, right? This is the other part of my day job, is thinking about the climate. So what's the future of warming that we are on track for, which is this amount of warming here, which is about 3 degrees Celsius by the end of the century? Or do we implement, say, the Paris Agreement goals and we stabilize warming to roughly where we're at now? Or do we drill, baby, drill and backslide and again, dig it up, burn it, because that's what we decide as a society? So I want to think about those two big things as we're framing this question about what kind of city, what kind of society, what kind of planet do we want in the future? Cities are really important for this because approximately 70% of greenhouse gas emissions are attributable to urban areas, with just a little bit over half the global population. So that means that those of us that live in urban areas are affected by climate change pretty substantially, but also are able to affect future amounts of warming more so than non-urban areas. So there's a really big role, if we're concerned about something like climate change, for people in urban areas to think about, what kind of Raleigh do we want, not only related to making it Raleigh a great place to live, but how does it add up to this at the global scale? The cities are really on the front line of that. How did we get here? Rob went deep time. I'm doing short time here. Two converging trends, I think, facilitated how cities have developed in our region to get that Charlanta type of urban development format. One was the suburban ideal. This sort of developed in 19th century market capitalism, where you started getting this burgeoning middle class, and there was this ideal of the English manorial estate. That was kind of the ideal people were striving for. The problem is that there's no longer just like 1% or less of the population that's the English nobility that can have English manners. When you have a huge middle class, everyone that's going to live out in the country like that, that's just called a farm then. So if you're going to stay close to where all the wealth is that created that middle class, you have to somehow make a city that can accommodate these larger type of estates that people were interested in. So one of the first solutions to that was things like mass transit, okay? This is a trolley line going down Hillsborough Street in Raleigh. This was sort of the first solution to that distance problem, in that these types of buildings and this type of residential development takes a lot more space. To solve the geometry problem, you have to be able to move people to where the jobs and the economic development is in that city that's producing that wealth in the first place. However, in the US anyway, we settled on this as a means to then solve that distance problem. We decided that individual automobile transportation was how we wanted to do that. By doing this, cars, they facilitate segregation of land uses and longer trips, right? You get in your car, you go wherever you want. This thing kind of created this feedback loop here that we've seen over and over again in the US, where you get car ownership increases and car use increases. Then that creates more traffic in these geometrically constrained cities. This is, again, just the geometry of cities. That creates an incentive to accommodate the increase in the cars on the road. That means that there's incentive to transform the built environment to optimize it for cars. And then that increases car ownership because you're sending that signal psychologically to individuals that the way to get around is not by walking or bus or taking that streetcar, it's to buy a car and use that car. So that's the sort of thing then we get the consequences of that across cities in the US, was that we did have these types of systems that were predated automobiles that then we transitioned to this automobile form of development. So that means suburbanization is urbanization in the Southeast, at least to this point. That's the dominant form. We have low residential densities, and they are residential because of that segregation of land use, and they require lots of space. So most southern cities have this small pre-auto core, that's the blue. Almost all the growth has been low connectivity because people get in their cars and go. And that's, again, that positive feedback in cementing that type of residential development. So that means we're trading off human scale accessibility for automobile scale accessibility and temporary storage of those. That's what parking lots are for, right? It's temporary storage of our cars as we're doing the things we need to do to get around. Consequences of that extend globally, right? Here's a comparison of two transportation emissions, greenhouse gas emissions, for two different growth patterns. On the left is us, on the right is Barcelona. Roughly the same population, about 10 times the carbon dioxide emissions for us versus Barcelona. So what happens if we keep this up? That was the paper we did. That was the southern megalopolis, the Charlanta. There's a simple model. I won't get into that. Rob talked about the slime mold. That's pretty accurate. We were trying to capture those car-oriented patterns of development, simulate through time. We look at what the results are. And one of the results we picked up on was this connecting of Atlanta all the way up through Charlotte and Raleigh, the new megalopolis, if we keep on this path. Science is iterative, so now we have a new model called Futures, which is developed here at NC State Center for Geospatial Analytics, which I'm very excited to be a part of. Check out our paper on that, where we talk about different scenarios of retreat from the coast. So I'll just end with this in terms of provoking thought, potentially. You know, what type of cities do we want for a 10 billion person Earth? If we think about what we've been doing so far and what the possibilities might be in the future. But also, what type of cities do we want maybe for a 1 billion person Earth? Think about those different ways that humanity could progress over the long term. So that's all I have, and thanks. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Adam. I'll point out two things here. One is that, you know, I think when we're building cities and building buildings, these farther futures become really immediate. You know, we're building a big new Woodson Hall across from Hill Library. We hope it lasts 200 years, that means the average inhabitant in it is in 100 years. And so these futures Adam's talking about are really very near term in many ways. The other is, Aaron Hipp, are you still here somewhere? Where did you go? Oh, he had to leave. So Aaron Hipp was here and is a connection point to Dix Park, which is that Aaron has just shown with the team that students who go birding along Rocky Branch toward Dix Park receive a mental health benefit from that walking. And so there are these layers of connections to where we've come from. And now I'll introduce Dara Bloom. Let's see, I'm getting to yours. Who is an associate professor of agriculture and human sciences at NC State and assistant director of community-based food systems in the Center for Environmental Farming Systems. And so Dara's going to help us to think about what it looks like to eat in these futures. So thank you so much. Thank you.
All right, yes, so I'm going to transition to talking a little bit about food and farming systems and this kind of regional food system of Charlanta. But before I do that, I just want to start with where our current food system is, because sometimes I think it's easy as people in that system to think, oh, this just kind of happened naturally, but it didn't. We have a system that we designed really intentionally with policies and through subsidies. We have this dual goal of supporting farmers and addressing food security, and the way we've done that is to really subsidize large-scale commodity production, so meaning corn and soy, really focusing on increased yield, large-scale industrial farms, which in essence actually serve as a subsidy for a low-wage economy. So I know we're talking a lot about high prices of food. Reality, comparatively speaking, across the globe, we have pretty cheap food, and that's what helped us to industrialize as a country, was to have these low wages because we knew we had cheap food. So if we know that we can create a system through policies and subsidies, then I think the opportunity is to not to have that slow growth, but to really plan for Charlanta and to really think, what are the policies, where do we need subsidies to create a food system that we want? So I'm going to argue that we've got 10 points that we need to plan for a food system, that the first thing is that it needs to operate at multiple scales to promote resiliency. So, I mentioned kind of Charlanta as a regional food system, but realistically it needs to have different scales within that system and be connected to the national system. So hyper-local, I'm thinking like community gardens, urban farms within the urban area. Local, though, too, I think, that region is really large. If you're thinking about distribution of foods, you need kind of the local kind of sub-regions within that. And then those connections to the national level. So theories of resiliency talk a lot about diversity in the food system. That often means diversity of markets for farmers, diversity of supply chains and sourcing for consumers. So we saw this in COVID-19, where there was national supply chain disruptions. And for a lot of people and institutions, having those local supply chains in place was really critical to be able to withstand shocks. We also need to be thinking about integrating farmland and productive green spaces. So, I mentioned with having those hyperlocal, the urban farm, the community garden, those aren't going to be harder if we're not planning for them and creating that space. And then we also need to be thinking about the urban fringe and protecting productive farmland. So this is a great report, if you're interested in this, from American Farmland Trust, which really actually honed in on that corridor between Atlanta and Charlotte as some of the farmland that's most under threat from the pressures of development. So we need to make sure that farmland preservation is a priority, and we're thinking about how to really feed and support this regional food system. I also think it's really important to think about the food system in connection to other sectors. I think a lot of times, especially when we talk about food security, there's this idea of like, okay, how do we get the food system to kind of fix all these problems? And it's like, well, it's not just the food system, right? The root cause is poverty, and we know that. So it's not just affordability and accessibility of food, it's all these other issues around housing and healthcare. And I wanted to highlight transportation because I think clearly as we're thinking about this mega city, questions about transportation are going to be critical. And then how you overlay a food system and healthy food access points on top of that will be really important. So we know from food security research that transportation is one of the biggest barriers for keeping people from eating healthy local food. So I think, having that conversation, where are the farmers markets, where are there, grocery stores, and overlaying that with a public transportation system will be also really critical. I also think this process of thinking about policy design needs to be participatory. So the people who are most affected by the food system should have a say in what that food system looks like. This is Community Food Strategies is a program here in North Carolina that works at organizing food policy councils and coalitions across the state. I think they're a great model for that. You can think about food sovereignty as really a framework for understanding this participatory policy development. Charlanta is going to be especially, think about how to balance, like, be a lot more consumers than producers. So how do you balance that and that participatory process? But I think it's possible. I also think that if we have this regional food system, we have to think about how to have really great people working in it. So post-COVID, food and farming, as with a lot of sectors, are suffering from labor shortages. The food service and farm workers are the only workers who are exempt from federal minimum wage laws. So I think if we really think about these workers as essential workers, we need to bring dignity to their jobs, have living wage, benefits, so that we really have a sustainable food system that's actually sustainable for the people working in it too. Building off of that, we need pathways to bring people into those jobs. So if you don't inherit a farm, it can be really hard to access farmland, get the skills and resources that you need to become a farmer. I think providing programs to do that, loans to help people afford the infrastructure will be really important. And part of that, too, is that we really need to address historical discrimination. So we have had the USDA discriminated against a lot of farmers of color in trying to access loans. And loans are a really important part of farming operations to keep the farm afloat before the harvest, and to afford the infrastructure that's going to be so critical for farmers to be able to scale up to actually serve this really large market. So we need to really take that into account and find ways to really support BIPOC farmers. I also think we need to subsidize low-income consumers and institutions. If we want them to be eating healthy local food, thinking about food as medicine, we need to have them have the ability to afford it. We do currently have federal food assistance programs for individuals, for institutions. In working with those institutions, the reimbursements are not actually enough for them to afford healthy local food. So on the flip side, so if you're trying to subsidize consumers to be able to afford it, I think we also need to subsidize fruit and vegetable production. So I mentioned that historically, we've subsidized commodity products such as corn and soy, which is why food made from those products is actually a lot cheaper than fruits and vegetables. So we know that Americans don't eat the recommended servings of fruits and vegetables that we need for a healthy diet. And part of that is we need to bring the price down by subsidizing fruit and vegetable production. I also think we should subsidize mid-sized farms. So yes, I mentioned we need lots of different scales, and I'm sure lots of different farmers at different scales need support. But those mid-sized farms are really critical. Really know that they can be community anchors. They tend to purchase local inputs, hire local labor, but they can still operate at a scale where they can benefit from economies of scale that help them bring their prices down. So they can sell at wholesale prices to institutions like schools, while still being those community anchors. And historically, we've really lost these mid-sized farms. We have a lot of small-scale farms that don't produce that much food that we eat, and then we have not a lot of large-scale farms, but they're producing most of our food. So I do think it's possible to plan for this Charlanta, to develop policies that meet these goals. I will say one thing that I think we need to think about in terms of policy implementation is the different scales that we're going to have to operate at. So we've got 2 states, we've got several counties, we've got several municipalities. So that question of how do we actually implement the policies needed to create this food system, I think is going to be a challenge that we'd have to really consider. That's it.
Great, thank you. Our next speaker is Francis de los Reyes. Francis has a long title, so bear with me for a second. He's the Glenn and Phyllis J. Futrell Distinguished Professor, University Faculty Scholar, and Alumni Distinguished Undergraduate Professor of Civil Construction and Environmental Engineering at NC State. He also leads the Global WASH Cluster. Francis, looking forward to it.
Okay, I'm going to start with a statement that's going to freak all of you out, because I know something about each and every one of you. Today, you all drank some water, and today you all used the toilet. Right? Right? Okay, no objections. I'm also going to make a bold prediction. 100, 200, 300 years from now, humans, if the species is still around, we're still going to use water, and we're still going to use and figure out a way to manage our waste, our poop, right? So cities know this. Charlotte, Atlanta, they know this. So they actually have citywide plans that maybe until 2065, it's okay. They look at the water yield, they look at the wastewater infrastructure, and it's pretty safe. Yeah, it's okay. And it's okay, right? So they have a plan until 2065, but beyond that, it becomes a little bit dicey. Maybe it's uncertain because of climate change. Maybe it's not going to be sustainable. And maybe it's not sure that everybody is going to have access. We're talking about underserved communities that currently are already underserved, but in the future, 100, 200 years from now, maybe they will also have more disparities in terms of access to basic water service. So now if an alien were to come to the Earth and take a look at our water infrastructure, this is what they're going to see, this centralized water infrastructure, where basically we get water from a large lake or a reservoir. We treat that water in a large water treatment plant, and then we pump all this water, millions of gallons per day, thousands and thousands of miles, to houses where basically people use clean drinking water to flush their toilets. And then we collect that again, thousands of miles of pipes, and we pump it long distances to a large wastewater treatment plant before we discharge that to the environment. Now, some cities, especially in the West, like San Diego, for example, want to close this loop, and because of drought and other pressures, they say, okay, we can actually treat that wastewater and make that potable water and also be used for non-potable uses. So the mayor-elect talked about Singapore. That's what Singapore does. 50% of their water actually is recycled this way, although it does go through a reservoir. So the problem with this, many problems. One is that there's this hidden infrastructure we don't see. Thousands and thousands of miles of pipe. So this is the sewer system for Atlanta. 4,000 miles of water and sewer. And Charlotte is even worse in terms of miles of pipe, because it's 8,000 miles of water and sewer pipes. And that's an issue because not everybody is actually connected. So for example, in this Charlanta scenario, you can see a lot of dark spaces there. And my guess is those are the places where it's going to be infeasible, too costly to connect to sewer lines. So here's an example. This is Metro Massachusetts, Boston area. And the dark lines, again, are the sewer lines. But then the other areas, the oranges and greens, are actually areas where they're not connected. So people are on community wells, maybe private wells, maybe for wastewater, they have septic tanks. Okay. So they're not ever going to be connected to a centralized treatment system. So we have an issue. Where do we get the water in the future if we're facing 10, 20, 30 billion people? Well, we can do things like this, right? We can actually haul a glacier. It's going to be tough for a place like Charlanta. It's going to be too expensive. Well, we have really a few choices, right? We only have groundwater, we have surface water, and that's pretty much it. You can argue we have seawater, we can desalinate, but still might be energetically and expensive, and also just too costly. So we have to think about that. And also, Charlanta is not really along the coast. So there's another kind of water called blue water, which is the water that's in the air. So of course, we know that as rainwater harvesting, right? People do this already. And we're going to see more of this in houses as well as small communities. And we'll also see a lot more harvesting of atmospheric water using things like condensation systems. Maybe with a small input of power, we can get water back. And this, again, can be for a large community or for individual houses. But we can also look at the consumption side. So if you think about how water is used today, more than 50% is actually used for flushing the toilet and washing your clothes. And then there's also the leaks that happen. There's a lot of leaks because there's a lot of pipes, right? So if we actually reuse some of that water and don't use clean drinking water for flushing our toilets, right off the bat, or if you can also think about washing our clothes with recycled water, right off the bat, more than 50% of our water consumption goes away. So what are we talking about? We're talking about a house of the future of water. To do this, we have to understand the different colors of water. So yellow water is, take a guess. Yeah, urine, right? It's got 80% of the nitrogen, 50% of the phosphorus. And if we recycle that, we can actually use that for agriculture. And so imagine toilets, and they exist today, that are urine-separating toilets, 2 holes, one in the front, one in the back. And then the actual toilet water, where the human waste goes, that can be used for creating energy, maybe as biogas, or maybe as pellets for fuel. The other big water is the gray water. This is the water from the sinks, from the faucets, and that's not as dirty. And maybe we can treat that and use that for flushing our toilet. And also, imagine this, washing your clothes. And then you have maybe rainwater is going to be part of that. Maybe atmospheric water, like condensation, is going to be part of that too. Now imagine all of that in your basement or in your garage. Okay? So we can start thinking about what that looks like, let's say for a house like this. And you might say, it's too expensive, it's too complicated. But really, if you start building your house, it's really not going to look that much different from what you have right now. You're going to have a few more pipes, but not a lot. You can have a system in your garage or in your basement. And it's going to be the size of a washing machine, but it's going to treat and recycle your gray water. And this is already happening also in modern apartments. This is the Solaire apartment in New York. Maybe some of you have heard about this. They use rainwater and they use gray water. They treat them in the basement, the gray water, and then use that to flush the toilets. And this apartment building in New York actually uses 50% less water than comparable apartments. Now, the solution is actually a decentralized or hybrid solution. It's going to be different depending on where you are in Charlanta or any other city. Some are better served by centralized systems, but some are going to be served by decentralized systems, maybe clusters of houses, maybe a dozen houses with the same system, maybe a small community, or maybe at the most decentralized scale, this house of the future of water I'm talking about. But how do we operate, how do we maintain this system? Well, basically, you're going to have sensors and you're going to have data. And you're going to have in the future on your phone, you can basically figure out what's going on with your water quantity and with your water quality. Just like everything else that you can monitor right now from your phone, right? Your temperature at your house and so on. So that's going to be, I think, what's going to be happening in the future. For that, we need sensors, we need data. And then finally, we have to think of this as an integrated socio-economic system, socio-technical system. It's not just something that, we open our tap, we flush our toilet, and forget about it. It's actually something that we'll be aware of every single day because it's integrated into our way of life. Thank you.
Thank you, Francis. Our next speaker is Liz McCormick. Liz is an assistant professor of architecture at UNC Charlotte and a licensed architect. And she just finished her PhD work like last week, right? And so welcome and congratulations, Liz.
Hi. So as Rob mentioned, I'm an architect, so I'm going to talk a bit about buildings and the built environment, but more specifically, our relationship with nature and how it's been damaged by what we've done with the built environment. I always love starting with this image because it shows, it's a graphic of Manhattan. So showing that the amount of floor area occupied by interior space is almost 3 times the amount of land area that it's built upon. And so this was what you might think, you know, Manhattan is a fairly dense city, it might be an outlier. This is becoming more and more common in cities around the world. And not only has the amount of interior space grown, but the amount of time that we spend indoors, that's shifted dramatically in the past 100 years. So the enclosed environment, and particularly when it's controlled entirely by mechanical ventilation, it's a unique ecosystem that we've created that researchers are now calling the indoor microbiome. So let me ask you a little crowd engagement here. I want to know, which condition do you believe to be healthier, indoor air or outdoor air? Who thinks indoor air is healthier? In the United States. A few people. Who thinks outdoor air is healthier? Whoa. Okay. So you're a little bit of an enlightened audience here. This is not the usual response that I get, but most Americans think indoor air is dramatically healthier. Actually, the EPA says indoor air can be 2 to 5 times worse than outdoor air because of indoor contaminants that collect indoors. Allergies and other asthma, respiratory issues like asthma are increasing across the globe, but more so in the developed world because of our long-term exposure to these poor quality indoor environments. And so there's a growing body of evidence that shows this is due to environmental exposure and not genetic changes. So this is a statistic I'm sure you've all seen many times before. Americans spend upwards of 90% of their lives indoors, with another 4 to 5% spent in transit. And these artificial environments and their associated health impacts have become defining features of the Anthropocene, the geological era that we're believed to be in now. So what I'm suggesting here is not that we need to clean up our built environment, but we need to holistically reconsider what it means to build against the forces of nature. I put a prompt, this is an AI-generated image, I put a prompt into an image generator, generic city glass buildings. This could be anywhere in the world. Where are we here? It's a trick question. It's both. It's Atlanta and Charlotte, so if you're thinking it's both, it's a merged skyline. But it's pretty generic. There's not a lot of differences. You don't really see where Atlanta ends and Charlotte begins. And this is what it often looks like inside. So viewed through a deterministic lens, the widespread adoption of air conditioning in the early 20th century fundamentally transformed our relationship with nature, and we turned our buildings into sanctuaries, something to protect us from the forces of nature, from the caprice of weather, things that we thought we needed to be shielded from, and that's what our buildings and the built environment and ultimately our cities do. But despite the perceptions of outdoor air today, there have always been certain positive health implications associated with fresh air. This is the baby cage that was from the 1920s, where people living in urban environments could still air out their baby and get the benefits of fresh air, which is believed to improve the immune system. Of course, the sanatorium movement during the early 19th century, where open air therapy was a standard treatment for tuberculosis and other infectious diseases until the invention of antibiotics in the 1950s. In a similar response to the tuberculosis epidemic, the open air school movement emerged as a hybrid between sanatorium and schoolhouse, designed to limit exposure to respiratory diseases. Does this sound familiar? Oh, I had another image here. It was supposed to lead directly into the next one, where we saw this again, where we moved schools outdoors. Just to go back, because I showed it. This is in New York City in 1911. This is in New York City in 2020. So the concept of the fresh air cure seemed to return, albeit temporarily with COVID-19, where we again questioned our relationship with indoor space. So I know this is a blurry image, but I'm not saying that buildings are bad and that we've done bad things with our cities. There have been a lot of improvements that we've made, especially in terms of energy efficiency, carbon, materials, health and wellness, that sort of thing. But what I am saying is that we can't just keep tinkering with those small things. We have to holistically rethink what we're doing in our buildings and our cities. Because none of these strategies question our relationship with nature, buildings, or the planet. And instead, I think we need to be asking, how do we reconcile a design history that for decades has prioritized separation over integration, control over collaboration, and enclosure over porosity? Our modern building approach is to distinctly separate between inside and out, humans and nature. And what we should be thinking about is a more blurred approach, where instead of thinking as a building or a city as an edge, that we think of it more as a gradient. Learning from the natural world, we see this is an image of an estuary, which is a transitional zone where freshwater meets saltwater, which creates a rich blend of ecosystems. And this dynamic interaction supports a high level of biodiversity. So from a broader term, looking at it, an ecotone, this is a region of transition between two ecosystems. So why do we think of our buildings as their own little individual ecosystem? Why can't it be a blending of multiple ecosystems? So we think about what that means for our buildings and our cities, to have blurred conditions that reposition our relationship with nature so it's not something to be feared or protected from. And instead of viewing buildings as something that are fixed, neutral entities, we embrace the dynamic qualities of the natural world. So in this case, buildings themselves become dynamic, evolving in response to the planet's natural rhythms with both human and environmental health in mind. So in the era of the Anthropocene, we have to consider what the next species will learn about us from what we've left behind, especially when examining the cause of our ultimate decline. And a huge part of that story is our relationship with nature. So as we move into conversations about Charlanta and larger urban endeavors, we have to really think about what it means to be human in a rapidly changing climate and how that influences the way we occupy the planet and construct our built environment. Thank you.
Well, these are great. Our last speaker tonight is Dan Burden. Dan is the Director of Inspiration and Innovation with Blue Zones, LLC. That's a good title. An organization which employs evidence-based solutions to help people live better, longer lives. Dan's a good person to know. He's the nation's most recognized authority on walkability, bicycle and pedestrian programs, street corridor and intersection design, traffic flow and calming, road diets, and other city planning elements. The White House recognized him as one of the top 10 champions of change in transportation. Time magazine called him one of the 6 most important civic innovators in the world. And his peers at Planetizen list him as one of the 100 most significant urban thinkers of all time. We're so delighted to have Dan provide the last talk tonight.
Well, good evening, North Carolina. Do we have outsiders, South Carolina filter in? No? Okay. Well, I'm delighted with the honor to be a keynote featured speaker with you tonight. And I'm going to really get down to the basics of how to get back healthy cities. That if we have healthy cities, we have healthy people. And if we have healthy people and healthy cities, we'll have a healthy planet. So all elements work together. And what I want to do is build the baseline for how far astray we've gone and what steps we need to take to get back. Quick question, you don't need to answer it because I'm going to answer it. Why do we have cities? And unless we know why we have cities, we'll get it wrong every time. There are just too many other pressures pulling us apart. But it's basically simple. Cities are our invention to maximize exchange. Work, culture, friendship, ideas, knowledge, and to minimize travel. But what we've done is just the opposite. And we need to understand that until we get that right, we're not going to become healthy either as cities or any other source. By the way, one of my favorite little small towns in America is Old Town, Key West. Who built Old Town? Who said pirates? Oh, Chuck, you know the answers. Okay. Okay, you're right. The pirates. And now, on average, how many years of college did they attend? The rest of Key West sucks. The streets don't drain. They're not able to afford to maintain the road. Why would you want to get off the road on that side? You got to get to the other side where all the land uses are. And what in the world does that arrow in the middle mean? And I'm here to remind you that this was built by college graduates. And it's true. The pirates just used common sense. They figured out what's the right scale and how do we do it. But college graduates are following rules, and the rules are broken. So I always turn to my greatest mentors and inspirers, Jan Gehl, who basically married a human behavior specialist. And she said at the start of his career, Jan, you're getting it all wrong. This doesn't work for people. And Jan has become the great leader for all of us to understand how to build buildings in a way that they work for people. I've had the opportunity to work in pretty close to 4,600 communities so far. I turned 80. I'm happy. I welcome you all to join me as an octogenarian. But I've had a lot of great success stories. Farmington, New Mexico, we were able to take out 2 lanes and provide more parking, more bike facilities, and it was done by the secret of working on intersections to make them work. Another town I had the opportunity to work in because of climate change, this railroad goes underwater every single year, shuts down the whole rail system, north-south. So we knew that the railroad was going to increase the height, had to, and so we took the opportunity and we rebuilt the road, knowing that we're going to not be able to cross the tracks if the road deck weren't higher. This brought in over $750 million of new investment for a town of only 20,000. So pretty amazing, but the big area I want to feature is the difference between Portland and Atlanta between 1980 and 1990. And notice because they decided to contain the growth and work with the fabric of the existing city, they lowered their taxes almost 30% during that 10 years, where Atlanta had to increase theirs 22%. So building for walkability, density, all the things we talk about works. We can just basically take a look at an area from the air and decide whether or not anyone would want to live there, or if it would be a solar area that's just going to heat up the environment totally, make it very unhealthy, or Guanajuato, where they didn't have the money to do that. What they did is they sent the traffic underneath their city through their old silver mines. Talk about recycling, right? But I also like, in my presentation, to introduce language. What are all these people doing that are circled? They're all doing the same thing. They're socializing. In our country, we call that loitering. And most European countries don't even know what that word means. They call it lingering. And the higher the lingering, the more successful the place they've built. A good friend of mine, an engineer, points it out this way, that in the 1400s, this is what the belief was that the world was. Everything rotated around the earth, everything. And along came Galileo, Copernicus, and they said, mathematics, modern mathematics says it can only be this way. And they were told not to talk. And they didn't, because they wanted to continue to live. I'm going to say something even more crazy. What if this is not right? What if modern mathematics, economics, everything we look at says it's got to be this? That it's around people that we build our communities. Then everything becomes much simpler and much more workable. We see that through this illustration by Victor Dover. Think of his name, you're going to hear it again. They went from the street on the left to the street on the right. Which one's cooler? Which one uses less paving? Which one makes far more money? 800% more money when you build for people. I had the great opportunity in the late 1990s to work on Hillsborough Street. This is the way it was, and of course, this is the way it is today. It's one of my greatest sources of pride of all the work I've done in my 50 years. It's a street that used to claim more lives than almost any other street in North Carolina, and now it's one of the safest streets. And it also is built, isn't that great? So to have healthy places, we acquire healthy lives. I'm going to start with the point that why walkability is the key to human health when it comes to longevity, just having a good, healthy lifestyle. By the way, in the middle, that's my grandson, Jack, when he was just taking his first steps. Today, he's now able to drive a car. So you can see this goes on. But I do work for Blue Zones, and from all the research done through many great universities, including Duke, they were able to prove that genetics only is accounting for 20% of how long we live, how healthy we are. The rest of it's up to us. And that's great news. But we've got to build a system where people just naturally want to walk and bike and do and socialize. People used to have on average 3.1 friends. It's down to 0.09. Think about that. And so we want to get all of these elements back just for people to bump into one another. People who are friends or people who just you haven't seen for 12 years or something. And that's really, truly so important for people to live healthy lives. This is Claremont, California. I think they have about 6,000 colleges there. These have to be college professors, right? And they're going to live longer because they belong to a society. They share ideas and so on. So again, my main thought is that we shape our cities and then in turn they shape us. And it's just absolutely true. The healthiest cities are the ones where people walk the most, bike the most, bump into the greatest number of people. But to do it, we have to have the right systems. So this is Tyson's Corner, circa 1935, 1980, and what it became. Now, when you think of Charlanta, is this sustainable? Does it work? No. It's got all the parts, but they're all in the wrong locations. And so we need to talk about, first of all, not calling this a city. It's something else. But then we go only about 40 miles away to Washington, D.C. They've got the same parts, a few more, but it works. People can walk, they can transit, they can bike, and they can live close to where all their services are, right? So this is the image we need to have in our mind. I like to do it with graphics. If we have poor street connectivity, looks like this. You cannot walk, you cannot bike. All the big traffic's going to be on the big roads. But if we set the perimeter for a block, say from 1,200 feet to 2,100 feet, then people can walk. And they have many different ways they can go. But they still won't walk because there's nothing to walk to. So we make sure that we have parks, say within a quarter mile of every house, schools that are neighborhood schools, work centers that are there. This is what we should be striving for with everything we do. We can see it done very well with two illustrations of the same area, kind of a tale of two places. What I'm now focused on, how can we take what's on the left, which is not livable, and turn it into what's on the right? And that we can do, and I'm going to show you that. But it has to get down to the details. Would people walk here? What if you do this? Some. But what if you do this? You have to have the eyes on the park, right? And until you do, people aren't going to feel secure. So we have to rewrite our codes that were written backwards. And another town I got to work in, this is Albert Lea, Minnesota, the very first blue zone in America that we constructed. And we had already fixed Main Street, but along came the opportunity to do a road diet for the street up front, further up. And we did. The Minnesota DOT fought us on that, but we were able to overcome that because people were organized. Again, the efforts of Blue Zones with Albert Lea, we were able to do that. The crashes went down 71%. And of course, now new buildings will come in. A whole system has to be looked at. This is a scene in Maui. It's at the high school. Notice no one's walking. There are sidewalks. There are bike lanes. But if you get into this traffic at this time, you'll sit there for 20 minutes because we didn't look at building a system. Another key point. Target speed. How many of you are familiar with that term? Okay, a couple dozen. Very important that we design a speed we want people to go so that they do. The upper the scene is in the Carolinas. It's a horrible place. It only has to move 17,000 cars. One lane can move 17,000 cars. The lower is managing 48,000 cars, and they even have leftover capacity, and it's fewer lanes. So think about what speed would people go with this scene? Anybody throw out a number? Yeah, a lot of people say 40, 45, even 50. But what if you did this? What if you do this? What if you do this? And here comes a big one. What if you do this? Now the planners, engineers have done most of what they can do, and now you have to have the developer, and now the developer is being given permission to do this. And I can guarantee you the speed won't be above 19 miles an hour. I've been able to repeat that over and over and over. We need density. Until you have a certain threshold of people being able to live within an acre, then you just don't have the, first of all, the money to do the things you need. A really ideal density would be 20 units per acre. That doesn't mean that it's crowded at all. But you also have to have connectivity. Notice the brown lines. That's the way we always built cities. It wouldn't make any sense to do it any other way. But then come the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, all we've been building is the disconnected street system, forcing all the traffic down to the bigger roads and then back into the neighborhoods. I'm predicting we're now going to go back to internal trip capture. This is an example of a poorly designed community. It has sidewalks. You can even see the stores, but you can't get to them because there was absolutely no requirement or thought of what kind of services people would need. It works out economically. Seattle is very well laid out, really nice bounds, the pattern, and as a result, they only need wire and fire service, where on the right, because of the very broken, disconnected street system, you have to have 4.6 times more fire houses, with each one costing quite a bit, 2.8 million per year. Now multiply that times police service, sewer lines, water lines, everything, and you begin to realize that the model of Bellevue really doesn't work. I can take it closer to home. This is a neighborhood in Atlanta. We've got almost 4,000 miles of road in the neighborhood, but only 21% are doing the work. Therefore, we have to widen them, and we have to have fatalities and all the other crazy things because we didn't put in enough veins, enough connectivity. The conventional on the right, say if your child wants to play soccer, you drive them there It's going to be a while. You go home, you go pick them up because you still love your child. And so 4 trips. But on the right, the same exact number of rooftops, the same square footage of retail, and now you have a choice. You can walk, you can bike, you could drive. And but the point is, traditional is the form that works, and that's what we should be building in the future. Locational efficiency. I was working in a very small rural town one night, and I found out where they had put their seniors, where they had put people with disabilities, where they were building or had built their multifamily. And that night, they were about to put their town hall away from where people could walk or bike. That puts more people in cars, widens more roads when you do that. A really good friend of mine, one of my mentors, is Ramon Trias. He was the planning director for this small town. Notice it has good bones. But over time, let me go back one. You can see the bones laid out. All the roads point to the water. But over time, what happened was we overpaved everything. They changed the town code. I believe it was around 1985. And today, truly, this is what Fort Pierce looks like. It's making a lot more money, and it's really contributing to quality lives and healthy lives. Here's basically, real quickly, what happened. We used to have main streets, and then we sent them out, spread them out along these big roads, and made the roads less efficient. What we're now learning to do is to recluster. So we have an urban hub. This works for transit, works for walking, biking, and living there. So Victor Dover laid this out. This is in Arlington, and you can see how it works. The 3 points are actually half a mile apart, exactly the way we used to lay out our trolley lines, right? Now, a quick capture of where we might go from here. So we have a way a community develops. So you've got the community, a 2-lane road, but people start to settle in another area. So you have to widen the road, you do, and then you get more growth and more traffic, and you reach a point where you've saturated, you can't really build any more road, but the question then comes up, what do we do? How do we save ourselves? Many people say you can't improve anything further. I hate that word, by the way. I can share why. But the point is, yes, we can now save this road. So you go back to the picture, and then you start to infill and build real place. And with that infill, you can, I think, see it shaping already. You now have 2 parallel road systems. That takes pressure off the main road, which you can now build as a successful place again. I've had the opportunity to work in a number of great communities. This is another one I'm proud of. In 1996, when I worked in University Place, which, by the way, has no university, and at the time they had no place. But you can see what happened. By 2020, we have a real village. And they built the library there, wonderful housing. This is what we had to start with. We start with the road. You have to. And we transformed to this. Now you can get across the street. We can better control speeds. By doing this, we were able to attract Whole Foods and Trader Joe's. And then, of course, build the entire community center. You can see how the trees filled in. And so, yes, we can do it. And to me, that's what we should be doing. One model built project at a time. We need to get the density in, and we need to have the physical space. But I'm going to close out with three quick scenes. Why are all the people on one side of the road? It's the only place there's any shade. People are smarter than most people give them credit for. We need shade, right? And I also want to draw inspiration for all of you people here tonight who are either starting out or somewhere in the middle of great careers. This is the best time in all life to be doing what you're doing and to make this difference. So Bill Murray and I thank you for what you do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dan, and another round of applause for all the speakers. And we're going to call everybody back up for a minute here in the interest of allowing time for the most important thing to happen, which is for all of you to circle the speakers and pepper them individually with questions and to meet them. We'll just do a handful of questions up here and we'll save some time for that community building and conversation. Thanks, Jory. So Jory's got the microphone. Questions, comments, bold visions for the future that you want? Yeah.
So Dan, why do you hate the word improve?
Improve for who? Every time an engineer uses that word, they're improving it for traffic. If we were improving it for walking, biking, transit, and driving, great. Then you can use the word, but don't use the word improved when you're harming a number of modes of travel. Yeah. Thanks for asking that question, by the way.
Other questions? Yep.
As somebody who doesn't work in architecture, city, or anything like that, how can quote unquote common people help make sure that these things do happen in our cities?
Exactly the way we did for Hillsborough Street. The important thing is, in this case, I believe the powerhouse behind this was Nina Schlossberg, a resident of one of the nearby neighborhoods. She realized that nobody in the neighborhoods wanted this horrific series of fatal crashes that kept occurring to the students. So she organized a charrette, basically a week-long series of events where we went out, we took walks, we talked through what the issues were, and then we had our engineers, our scientists with us. We were able to figure out the right solution and then get it built. But it takes somebody going into the neighborhoods and organizing the people. It turned out that the adjacent neighborhoods accepted more traffic in their neighborhood because there had to be some spillover. You can only pump so much traffic down a two-lane pipe, right? But we were able to do that. We had over 350 people take part.
I'll say too, there's a lot of opportunities that, what did you refer to yourself? A common person?
Yeah, just a person living
Okay.
here.
Well, so there are many ways to get involved if you want locally. Like Sig, who just spoke, knows like from, I was like on various boards and commissions in the city, like without any extra special sauce or anything. It's just that like I wanted to get involved. I actually started with meetings with the comprehensive plan for Raleigh back in 2007 and 8. And there are many ways to get involved if you want to. It's actually the barrier to entry is very low, and there's many ways to get involved if you want to.
And I'll say for Adam, I think Adam's impact on the world has been as much from his work as a common person as it is from his work as a uncommon, whatever that, yeah. Sarah?
Sorry, I just wanted to add, so
Oh, yeah,
just
sorry.
from the food system perspective, I mentioned community food strategies. So wherever you are across the state, we've got about 34 food policy councils and coalitions across the state. So if you're in Raleigh, Capital Area Food Network, and they've done an amazing job organizing, doing assessments, and then advocating for funding from the city, from the state. So there's a really well-funded food security network here because of the Capital Area Food Network. So, and that's again, that's open to anyone who lives here, eats here, wants to be a part of it.
I just want to say one of the easiest things you can do is just talk about it, ask questions. We talk about this a lot in the context of climate change. It's such a daunting topic. Just have a conversation over dinner with your family. That's the first place you start, and then it grows from there and turns into advocacy and turns into action. But the first thing is just asking questions.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thank you. Sarah?
Hi. I was really inspired by your presentation today and just hearing about your commitment and your passion and your work in this space. But as practitioners and public servants, I'm curious to hear, just with the depth of your work, what were sort of some of your most difficult times trying to troubleshoot? This work is emotional. It's takes a lot of inner strength and a community to support you. So I was just curious, like through each of your work, each of your presentations, what were some of the difficult things you were sorting through, or emotionally, and with others? Like, I think that's important to talk about those things to be able to go from the past, present, and towards the future.
And I'll just say there's a lot of knowing nodding up here if you can't see it from the back. Yeah.
Yeah, there's always pushback, and maybe it's even a good thing. There used to be planners and engineers. They were sharp. They knew what needed to be done, and they went out and they did it. For decades, that worked. But that stopped working maybe 30 years ago. Now, you really have to have a good process. You have to engage people. We have to apply the best of our skills. In fact, when I got into this field, when I was still a puppy, I really realized there were better technicians than me. So I went back to college and I got my training in interpersonal communications. How do people communicate? And then we, many of us worked hard to figure out how do we now engage people and help them make informed decisions. And they'll, the people who become informed will always be outnumbered by the people who remained uninformed. But those folks will turn out to be leaders and they'll bring the projects together. They really will.
Anybody else?
Sure. Yeah, for my part, just facing, similar to Dan, a lot of inertia, because really, for my work, a lot of the costs are really literally sunk costs, right? They're sewer lines. It's very hard to change the minds of people who are, funding this, whether research-wise or, actual construction. The thinking is just keep doing things like we've done them before, and that's really not, the way to reimagine things. So how to get through that is really just keep pushing. Personally, I've been involved with an effort to get funding for some of this work that is impactful for like 6 years now. And this is the third time we're going to try this major research push again. And, it's going to happen. Because, when we first started, nobody was talking about this. Now people are talking about water, and not just in the U.S., but also globally. So I think it's just a matter of time, just keep pushing, and sometime in the future, hopefully we'll have the same impact like, others have had. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'll say that I got interested in this field because I did community gardening along the U.S.-Mexican border on the Mexican side right out of college, and I worked with a lot of people who had, migrated from further south in Mexico where they had farms up to the border, and it was really powerful work, but it was also, I got really frustrated because I felt like I could really see the systems that I was coming up against, and it's like, yes, I could help people figure out how to garden in the desert, but there's all these structural constraints on that. From free trade and all these other things keeping them there. And so that's actually kind of what brought me back to graduate school to say, okay, how can I better understand those systems and think about how to change them? And so I think it's like, yes, all the organizing on the ground is all really, really important. And I think that's kind of this combination of bottom up and top down that we need to be looking at to how, that's just that question, like, how do you create that change? I think is something I constantly grapple with from a position at the university now.
I'm a federal scientist, so I'm not allowed to have feelings or opinions. I guess taking that hat
It would have
off.
been funnier if you just stopped there. But
Yeah, I know. I'll just add something nice, I guess, just personally. I mean, that's why in my personal life, the things that I care about, I do think that all of us here have something to offer to make the system and the society we want to see. And I think there's a lot of times that people think it's harder to get involved in shaping and changing those systems than it actually is in terms of what you have something to offer. And so I think that we all can do that. And I would just encourage people that if they do care about these things to jump into the fray and try to do that.
Thank you. And maybe one more question in the interest of giving folks a chance to meet the speakers. Yeah. Please.
Hi. Thank you all for your presentations. I really enjoyed them. I'm sure a lot of us has. And I wanted to follow up on the question that was just asked in some of your responses, particularly to Dan. Have you had the opportunity to work in like a predominantly Black or historically Black community? And if so, what was some of the successes and some of the challenges, particularly that you can bring to this conversation?
I've worked in very diverse neighborhoods. I'm working in a number right now. Parkland Spanaway in Tacoma is a neighborhood that got overlooked forever. And it has the highest fatality count, security issues, and so on as a result. Our challenge in that neighborhood is getting people to regain hope. They've lost hope. Everything was done against them. And so we have to invent new techniques to reach out to people, to meet them one-on-one, and regain some footing for them. I've worked in all Hispanic communities. I've worked in all Black communities. The process is similar. It's just that you have to work harder when folks basically gave up on the fact that anyone was going to help them. And so it's harder, but that's the part of my work I love the most. It really is. Yeah.
Anybody else want to speak to that question?
I mean, I mentioned a little bit in my presentation, just kind of follow up. I think that there's a lot of challenges specifically for African American farmers in the South and in North Carolina specifically. I mentioned historic discrimination by the USDA. There's also heirs property laws, which have been like a way that a lot of African Americans have lost farmland in North Carolina. So I think there is kind of an exciting movement of farmers who are Black who are coming back to the land or supporting each other. We've got Black farmers markets. I think there's just like a lot of kind of like young people who are coming back to farming or trying to really kind of find a way forward for kind of reinvigorating, I think, kind of like Black farmers. So Operation Spring Plant, if you're interested, I think is a really great example. They've actually been doing it for a long time and offering kind of technical assistance within kind of the Black farming community, because I think I work for cooperative extension too, and I think we often have been criticized, and rightly so, for prioritizing white farmers. And so, as much as I think we're trying internally to shift that there are really great examples of kind of the Black farming community coming together to support each other as well.
Yeah, in water and sanitation, it's really tied to income and race. I mean, we have the data that shows it's really correlated. And we have a lot of famous examples. Lowndes County in Alabama, maybe people have heard about this, where basically, there's people who flush their toilets, but the waste just goes straight into their backyard untreated, like cesspools, basically, because there's no good technologies for them because of their soil. You can have a septic tank, and at the same time, they're too far away to be connected to a centralized system. Here in Apex, North Carolina, we have a predominantly Black neighborhood that was actually in one of those donuts, right? The town actually, developed all around them, but they were left there and they were never connected to sewer and water. It's only been recently that they've been connected to water, and then only recently that some of them have been connected to sewer. So, and that's again a product of working with the university and advocating for that community and showing that it's possible economically to do that. So yeah, I mean, it's water and sanitation is inherently, there's a lot of issues there in terms of income and race.
I can't speak directly to the question because I'm not necessarily a practitioner, but A lot of my research work takes place in East Africa, and one thing that I've learned through that process is that you're often not welcome in certain communities, and to take a technology-first approach is especially not welcome. And so in my work, I've learned that it's essential to engage community through social science, qualitative research, and not just technology and engineering forward. So just as an advocate, you can tell my anthropology partner that there's a huge, huge value to social science research in community activities.
Well, let's thank this group again. And you know, I think both on the stage and gathered in this community, we have an extraordinary group of uncommon folks with ideas and opportunities. And I invite you to keep talking today, but also to keep talking with us about, you know, how we reimagine the future for Raleigh, for NC State's campus as a city, for North Carolina, for Charlanta. I think we really have great opportunities ahead of us and amazing people. So thank you so much.